This conference will now be recorded.
All right, we want to welcome you. I'm going to take up my mask here. We're going to welcome you guys to our webinar of emergency preparedness, preparing your business for physical and digital disasters. And we've got Mike Stapley here, and he'll introduce a little bit of his business, where he's from. But we're so glad to have all of you join us. If you have questions, please just go ahead and type it in the chat, and then we'll have Mike answer those questions. We'll take questions after each topic. There'll be 3 different topics, so we'll do a question and answer period after each individual section. So I'd like to introduce Mike Stapley here, and so we're so glad to have you here. Thanks.
Thank you, Josie. Thank you for your patience, everybody. The weather caused a little bit of a delay in us getting ready and getting prepared, so thank you for your patience. I might mention, too, this is going to be the first of a series of webinars this year, so at least every quarter we're going to be covering business, small business emergency preparedness topics. So this will just be the kickoff of many topics that we'll discuss. I would encourage you throughout the presentation, it is going to be a PowerPoint with slides. Take photos if there's a topic you might have some questions about later, and that's always a good way to be able to refer back to those. I'm going to start with the presentation right now, and so you'll be seeing that instead of me. And as Josie said, my name is Mike Stapley. I work for a company called Unity Communications. We are a all-in-one, one-stop IT company, but we are also a mobility company. So we work with all 3 of the cellular carriers, Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T. And then in addition to that, we supply any and all IT needs and services that you could think of. So that's my area of expertise. And so my discussion today will focus more in that area. And then, as I said, throughout the year, we'll have some other topics from a variety of other experts in the field on a variety of different topics. But feel free to get a pic there of my contact info. I'm happy to address any questions offline. And in the future, if anybody has anything they want to ask me about, please feel free to reach out. But as Josie said, we're going to talk about navigating both physical and digital disasters. And it's fitting that we're going to be doing these webinars here going forward, because if you think about it, we're already experiencing a lot over the last year between the pandemic. If you look at what's happening in Texas right now, even with the snow that we're seeing today, which is some of the most sizable snow that we've seen in Utah for a while here in the valley. Certainly here in Utah, there are physical disasters that we are susceptible to. It could be a large blizzard. It could be the big earthquake that we're promised that we're going to see at some point. And so it's important that everybody be mindful of the fact that they're not all physical. There are a variety of things that can happen. Cybersecurity is one of the topics that we're going to address today. And in the small business world, oftentimes that one gets overlooked, and it shouldn't. So that's one thing to be mindful of. The other thing, too, is that it's not just widespread disasters that small businesses need to think about. It can be things that are specific to your industry or specific to your business. If you depend heavily on a particular part of the public infrastructure, or if you depend heavily on the internet for your business, then obviously disasters can come in multiple forms. It may not be a storm, it may not be an earthquake, it could be an internet outage. It could be a cyber attack. It could be any number of things that could put your business in jeopardy. So as Josie said, we're going to cover 3 topics. We're going to kick off with AT&T FirstNet. And bear with me just for a minute. I'm going to kind of explain what FirstNet is and why it exists. But I promise you we'll bring that around to small business and how it can be beneficial for small businesses. Over the last few decades, there have been a lot of events that have signaled to both government and the private sector that there were gaps in the ability of first responders to be able to respond to those events. Back in the 90s at Columbine High School in Colorado, a lot of people don't realize that that high school was actually located in an unincorporated area of the county. The county sheriff's office had the primary responsibility for law enforcement there. But when a big call went out like that, what was going on at the school, multiple agencies responded. And one of the things that was learned was that not only were those agencies not really prepared in terms of jurisdictional things. So, for example, a SWAT team showed up from the city of Denver, which was nearby. And of course, they thought they should be in charge. The sheriff's department thought they should be in charge. But in addition to that, all of those jurisdictions were communicating with each other in different ways. So they were using different technologies, they were on different radio frequencies. And one of the things that was learned from that was that first responders in a given metro area or even in a state, it's important that they all be able to communicate with one another because not all emergencies are going to be limited to one jurisdiction. And if you think about a major earthquake potential here in Utah, same thing. It's not going to be limited necessarily to one city or one county. And so it's important that all of those first responders be able to talk to one another. 9/11 was another lesson in that the World Trade Center housed a variety of communication towers. That was in the early years of cell phone communication, and there were cell phone towers present on those buildings. There were radio towers for first responders. There were landline switch points. The World Trade Center was such a large complex that it had its own zip code. It was almost like its own little city within the city. So even landline communications were switched out through that building into the surrounding neighborhood. And so that the building and the complex of buildings there was kind of a complex of communication. When those towers fell, all of that communication went out. And the lesson learned from that was that there weren't a lot of redundancies. First responders at that time, they had access to cellular phones, but they weren't really using them as part of their daily work. So what's happened over time, and hurricanes have come into play, any disaster you can think of where communications and power are affected, lessons have been learned. So what the government did is the federal government set about with a commission to figure out how to fix these issues. The result of that was a 25-year federal government contract awarded to AT&T called FirstNet. And this is a way for first responder networks throughout the country to be able to communicate with one another and to be on the same page in the event of a disaster. But it also involves the private sector, and that's where small business can come into play. In any natural disaster, the limits of government are going to be exposed. And we're seeing that in Texas right now, where the federal government or the state government in Texas has made decisions over the last probably 2 decades that are affecting their ability for the power grid to work now in a once in a lifetime storm. More and more, it's important that we all understand that government can't do it all, and that as small business owners and as families, we're going to have to be responsible for some things ourselves. It's no different with FirstNet. The government is recognizing that there has to be a combination of private contractors and government agencies whenever there's a disaster. Any small business that has a contract with either local, state, or in some cases the federal government to be one of those responders in the event of an emergency should be aware of FirstNet and should be looking into it. In addition, there are business verticals that are automatically eligible for FirstNet. These center around transportation and healthcare, utilities. And so it's important for small business owners to be aware that FirstNet exists and that it's potential that there is potential that they are eligible to take part in it. Part of what I'm focusing on with the 3 topics that we're going to talk about today is that not only are they beneficial in preventing disasters or helping you to navigate a disaster, but there's also year-round benefit in each of the 3 things we're going to talk about. Small businesses sometimes put off emergency planning and emergency preparedness, no different than families do. We learned this with COVID, with all of the lines in the grocery stores and the runs on toilet paper and things like that. So most people are not as prepared as they should be, and small businesses are guilty of that as well. One of the advantages of the topics that we're going to discuss is that they provide year-round benefit to your business. So they're not the kind of things where you have to pick and choose, will I ever need this, and is it worth spending money on this for something that might be a 1 in 100 year event? or is this something that will benefit my business year round? FirstNet is one of those things that can benefit you year round if you qualify. So in essence, you'll have savings on your cell phone plan and your cell phone equipment. You'll have access to additional types of equipment that might be beneficial for your business, cradle points and things like that that bring the internet mobile, and can be used in vehicles in a variety of other ways. In addition to the businesses that are sort of automatically included in FirstNet, a case can be made for others. So if you have a contract that means that you could be available to government in the event that it's needed, we can then make a case with AT&T and have your business certified to be on the FirstNet network. The other advantage of FirstNet is that you get priority on the network in a time of need. So that makes your business more able to fulfill those contracts you might have with government, but to also provide help in the community, particularly if you have a good or service that people are going to need in a time of emergency. If you also have priority on the cellular network at that time, then that's obviously going to be beneficial and give you an advantage over some of your competitors. Everyone who is an AT&T customer benefits from FirstNet as well, in the sense that coverage is being expanded tremendously, particularly in rural areas, but also in the city. You're going to start to see what are called metro cells, and they're basically mini cell towers. They're going to start to pop up on light poles and utility poles. They're going to pop up in places where there may be gaps in coverage. In addition, we've probably all experienced a big event. Maybe you're at a football game or you're at a flea market or whatever it might be, and you notice that your cell phone doesn't work very well. And that's because the network is basically being overloaded by a huge number of people in one place where they normally would be. And the cell phone towers are designed to kind of shrink their coverage in order to handle that additional load. And that creates gaps. So these metro cells are going to be put in places where they will fill those gaps. When I mentioned there at the bottom that cases can be made for small businesses, kind of think about what you do and how it might relate to emergency response. Or, like I say, if you do have a government contract, then we can build a case for your business. I worked with a company in Lake Havasu, Arizona last year. Their main business is boat repair and maintenance. But as part of that, sometimes they're towing boats off the lake and back to their facility. So the sheriff's department ended up contracting with them to provide boat rescue when the sheriff's department was at max capacity. So if the sheriff's department was already dealing with a couple of boat rescues, then this company was brought in to fill the gap. And so by having that contract, they were eligible for FirstNet. This is another part of FirstNet here on this next slide, which is mobile trucks. There's even some aerial communications equipment. There's even a blimp, believe it or not. So AT&T can deploy these mobile resources whenever there are cellular or power outages. So we see this a lot with hurricanes and places where communication is knocked down. So the primary benefit of this, obviously, is so that first responders can communicate. But again, it eventually is beneficial to everybody that's on AT&T's network, including those small businesses that contract with government. Now this, on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the primary part of FirstNet, which is fire and law enforcement, EMS, the things that you would expect. But that extended primary is where small business comes into play. It's everything from healthcare to utilities to transportation, and there are other verticals. It's everything from tow truck companies to landscape companies. If we were to have a substantial blizzard here in Utah, and if the counties themselves and the cities themselves, the state, were to be overrun in terms of snow removal, they will contract with private companies to help. So it could be construction companies and heavy equipment companies that own excavators. It could be landscape companies who already own snowplow equipment. And so they would be contracted and brought in. And that's how FirstNet ends up being a partnership between government and the private sector and small businesses. The point here that I want to emphasize is that there are likely hundreds of small business owners here in Utah who have no idea that they're eligible to be on the FirstNet network. And so it can provide you savings year round if you're a FirstNet customer. But in addition, it will help you in terms of being a benefit to your company when the disaster strikes. The city of Millcreek, incidentally, is a FirstNet customer. They're one of my FirstNet customers. Should the city of Millcreek decide at some point to have their own fire and law enforcement, then the groundwork has kind of already been laid for the city to be able to expedite that pretty quickly in terms of how their law enforcement and fire would communicate. But they're currently taking advantage of FirstNet savings as is, even before they do that. The Unified Fire Department and the Unified Police Department that serve Mill Creek are also FirstNet customers. So FirstNet is what's allowing the first responders in this community to communicate the best they can, and particularly to be able to communicate well when there's a wide-scale disaster. And I highly, highly encourage any small business that fits in those extended primary categories to look into this and see if they qualify. It's absolutely worth doing if you do. So that's the last part of FirstNet. Josie, do we have any questions on this category in the chat? Any questions at all? We can either do them, probably ideally put them in the chat just to cut down on background noise and those kinds of things. And you can feel free to speak up as well if you have a question, but chat makes things a little easier as we go. All right, we'll move on to the next topic. This is one that gets overlooked frequently in terms of how beneficial it can be in times of need, and that is fleet and asset tracking. And again, kind of fitting with the theme of this topics that we're talking about, it will benefit your business year round. This is one of those services that can actually pay for itself, in my experience, 2 to 3 times over annually. The question you want to ask yourself as a small business owner is, if there were to be an emergency that would put keeping your business open in jeopardy, would you know where the vehicles and critical assets you own, would you know where they are at any given moment if they were needed in the event of an emergency? And you'd be surprised how often the answer would be no. Depending on the type of business, it could be as simple as, well, we did what we're supposed to and we bought a generator in case we have a long-term power outage. That generator's been sitting in the back lot of our business for years, and little did we know it was stolen a couple months ago and we never even noticed. It could be something like that. In the small business world, it's also common to lend things out to family, to friends, to other businesses. And if in the daily course of your business, you're actually renting out some of those things that would then be critical to you, or if you're in the construction business, for example, a lot of your assets could be scattered over dozens of locations at any given time. And those 2 or 3 things that would be critical to you to get back to your home base and be able to use to keep your business up and running, you may not know at any given moment where they are and how to locate them quickly. And then it turns into a scramble drill to try to figure out where they could be. You could literally be driving around town to 10 or 12 different locations trying to find them. That one trailer you need, that one generator you need, that one piece of heavy equipment you need might be the one too that you lent to your brother-in-law a couple weekends ago and haven't got back. In addition, one of the disasters that we don't think about is liability for a small business owner. If, for example, you have employees who drive vehicles associated with your business and you have an employee who has horrible driving habits, he's putting you at risk every single day for a huge liability situation that could bankrupt you. So fleet and asset tracking is one of those things that benefits you year round in the sense that you always have an eye on where your important equipment is, employee productivity. Are your employees on any given day where they're supposed to be? If they have a 2-hour job at a particular location, are they there for that full time? I've actually had customers who have learned about substantial liability risk because once they start tracking their vehicles, they find out their employees are spending a lot of time in places they shouldn't be, including at Liberty Park downtown scoring drugs. You'd be amazed some of the things that employers have learned about how their vehicles are being used and how their employers are spending their time. So this is kind of emergency protection for you and being able to quickly recover and use equipment that you'll need in the time of a physical disaster. But in terms of protecting your company from liability, what fleet tracking gives you the ability to do is that as your employees are driving around, you can actually track their driving habits. It will be telling you if they're speeding frequently. It will be telling you if they are hard braking frequently, which is obviously a sign of following too closely. In terms of year-round savings, most insurance companies will actually offer discounts if you are tracking driver behavior. In addition, you can set up maintenance programs for all of your vehicles. So you can make sure of one of two things. One, that vehicles are being serviced regularly on a given schedule, or two, that you're not having to rely on employees to let you know that the check engine light has come on in a particular vehicle, for example. And so you'll actually have the ability to be alerted both to vehicles not being where they're supposed to be, to a check engine light coming on, things of that sort. It also helps you in terms of billing disputes. I have a lot of customers where their customers will claim that the service they were supposed to provide wasn't being provided on the day it was supposed to, or that they don't feel the provider was there long enough to complete everything they were supposed to. In the wintertime, we have landscape companies that do snow plowing of parking lots and things of that sort. They will have customers say, I'm certain your guys never came. Fleet tracking gives you the ability to actually provide that customer with a report that says, yes, we had 2 vehicles at your location and here's how long there, here's the times. And so it helps you in terms of being able to get paid for the work you do. Some businesses deal with perishable products, and some of these asset trackers can actually be set up in a way where they will alert you to temperature and humidity problems. Farmers actually use these on their sprinkler systems so that they can actually automate based on humidity, based on current rain, things of that sort. It'll automate their sprinkler systems and they save a ton of money on water. Typically, over the course of a business, you'll save money on gas. You'll be more able to dispatch your employees based on a way that makes sense based on where they are at any given time. So you'll see gas savings, you can see insurance savings, billing dispute savings, perishables that don't go bad, improved maintenance, your vehicles are going to work better and you'll have fewer repairs. So that's why I say that over time, this can pay for itself anywhere from 2 to 3 times over typically. So asset tracking is a little different than fleet. Obviously, we're not talking about a vehicle that's being driven. An asset can literally be anything and everything. This next slide just shows a little bit about how fleet and asset tracking work. Essentially, you have the vehicle or the asset that's being tracked, and then above you see the GPS satellites. In the middle, you see the cell phone tower. There's also a person on the bottom middle, so you can actually track cellular devices as well. Basically, the GPS information is relayed via a SIM card in the trackers over the cellular network, and then basically that goes to the cloud. So that gives you the ability back at the office to be able to see both real-time information about where things are, and you can even set up geofences around a job site, for example, know if your employees leave that job site when they're not supposed to. You can even automate it with your time card system so that if vehicles go home with employees, when they get to the job site the next morning, they can actually be automatically logged in for work, automatically punched in on the time, so to speak. The reporting is extensive. It can be anything and everything you want it to be in terms of when any vehicle or asset was on any given day at any given time, and see a breadcrumb trail of everywhere they went. It can be the maintenance history and alerts. It's extensive. So the reporting can basically keep you in the loop on anything that's needed. But the key is, be asking yourself as a small business owner, is there a piece of equipment or two that, particularly in the event of an emergency, I can't live without in terms of keeping my business up and running? And how likely is it that it will be on site when that emergency happens? It's as quick as being able to hop on a computer or a mobile device and be able to look. The beauty of these fleet systems as well is you're not dependent on power necessarily, because GPS works regardless. And then in addition, a mobile device will give you access to the information you need that is already charged. This is a view of a major construction site. And the reason for this picture is literally every single piece of equipment you see in that photo can be tracked. Probably the smallest device I've ever had a customer track was a briefcase. This is a customer that had multiple retail locations, and so the business owner was typically picking up cash and bank deposits and things like that, and moving cash and sometimes expensive product between those locations. And so he had a bag that accommodated all of that, and there was a tracker built into that bag in a hidden compartment. And basically that protected him in the event that the bag was ever stolen, lost. Loss and theft prevention is one of the other ways that products like this save you a bunch of money. And if you have a particularly valuable asset that were to be lost or stolen, how financially devastating could that be to your company? And so that's another way to kind of prevent a financial disaster, is being certain that if something does go missing or gets stolen, that there's a much higher likelihood you'll get it back. And law enforcement being able to track that device via the tracker you have on it. Probably the largest piece of equipment I've ever had somebody track is actually pictured there, and that's the construction crane. They actually had multiple parts. I remember asking them, I'm like, how on earth would a construction crane ever go missing, or how would you not know where it is? But in their line of work, where they did a lot of highway and bridge construction, it actually made sense. They could have multiple job sites going on at once. And as a new job started, they needed to know where the crane was now, because it was quite a logistical task in order to get the crane disassembled and get it moved. They had multiple cranes. So that way they were able to stay ahead of their upcoming jobs and know where one crane was about to go down. And that was the one that was going to move to the next job site. They actually had to track multiple pieces of the crane. There were also parts of the crane, believe it or not, that were susceptible to theft. So again, disasters come in a wide variety of causes, and one of those could be having the theft of a very expensive piece of equipment that is detrimental to your business. And how easily would you be able to replace that and get back up? And all right, any questions on fleet and asset tracking before we move on? Excuse me. The big thing I want to emphasize on that topic that really is important for any small business that has vehicles that their employees drive is that the liability is a huge, huge risk. And it's important to know how your vehicles are being driven and how they're being maintained. Anything on chat? Any vocal questions anybody wants to ask? All right, we'll move on to cybersecurity. And I realize those first two topics might be a little more limited in terms of the scope and what kinds of businesses they will impact. Cybersecurity, if there's one thing that I can make clear from this, is that this is important to every business, regardless of size, regardless of how much you believe that hackers or scammers would have no interest in your business. This every single year is changing more and more and more. And the reason for that is that large corporations are investing more and more money into cybersecurity. And despite the millions and even billions of dollars that large corporations are investing, we still hear in the news all the time of data breaches where our personal information as consumers is stolen from the corporations that we do business with. And whether it's a retailer like Target or whether it's an insurance company or a healthcare provider, they all have sensitive data of ours, and they're all vulnerable to attacks where that data is stolen. As they invest more and more money, and as they invest more tools and resources, the criminals, and that's what they are, as criminals. We often refer to them as scammers or hackers. They're criminals. They don't care about us. They're only in it for their own gain. As those corporations invest more, the criminals are targeting small businesses, and they're doing it more and more and more. No small business can afford to ignore cybersecurity. This is another opportunity maybe to take a photo. I've got two links there at the top in blue, one from riskandinsurance.com and one from the Security and Exchange Commission of the federal government. I would encourage anyone to look at those articles. And it sort of reinforces the idea that this isn't just a concern of big companies or big corporations, that this affects everybody. The other thing that's really critical to keep in mind is that they play on our vulnerabilities. And what we're seeing over the last year with COVID, and I can guarantee you with what is going on in Texas right now, these scammers and the hackers are going to be working overtime in Texas over the next few months. Everyone, when you're vulnerable, you're actually more open to their games and to the way they play things. And we're going to talk a little more specifically about how they operate. But if you look at that stat on the third bullet point down, this is related directly to COVID. According to the FBI, cyber attacks and other scams were up 75% in 2020 compared to 2019. And that has everything to do with COVID. It has everything to do with the fact that people are vulnerable. Think about it from a small business perspective. If you're struggling, whether it's because of COVID or because of weather or something else that affects your business, you're a little more likely to let your guard down. And the reason is that you're anxious for that one more customer. You're anxious for that one more sale. You're anxious for anything that would be beneficial to your business. And most of all, you can least afford during those times to have something bad happen in terms of your bank account or anything along those lines. And so the hackers and the scammers, they are fully aware of that. They know that your guard will be down, and that's when they strike. According to Verizon, here in the West, we don't really think of Verizon and AT&T as internet providers, but through most of the country, particularly on the East Coast, Verizon and AT&T provide broadband internet and home internet, things of that sort as well. A Verizon study has shown that cyber attacks will cost the world economy $6 trillion annually by this year, 2021. And to put that in perspective, that is larger than the entire worldwide illegal drug trade. So these hackers and scammers are big time. It's a huge amount of money that they're dealing in, and everybody is vulnerable to them. The other thing that you have to remember in that last bullet point, for everything those corporations spend on cybersecurity, for every effort they go through, all their employee training, everything they do to try to prevent it, if they were to still suffer an attack, they are much better able than a small business to absorb that financial hit. For small businesses, this can literally be crippling. This can be bankrupting. This can be the difference between being in business today and being out of business next month, is just one scam, one cybersecurity attack. And we're going to go into a little more detail about how these work and about how to try and prevent them. So this just gives you a little better feel as well of the percentage of businesses that are experiencing data breach and how much of them are small businesses. This is talking about small business in particular. 61% of businesses in 2017 experienced a cyber attack. And one of the things I would stress, these are products that my company deals with on a regular basis and that we sell. We hear frequently from small business owners, no one would want to attack my business. There's nothing there. There's nothing for them to get. So that's one of the things that I want to emphasize is there's always something for them, and there's always ways for them to utilize whatever information you have. It's not always about a direct financial attack. I think that's one of the misnomers about cyber attacks is that they're just trying to drain your bank account, that they're just trying to take money from you directly. And we'll talk a little further about how that's not the case. There's a variety of ways that they use information that they can get from your business. And if you see there at the bottom, Cybersecurity Ventures estimates that by the end of 2019, there's an attack on small businesses every 14 seconds throughout the country. So again, this is not a corporate-only problem. This is absolutely a small business problem. That 54% of small businesses that experienced a breach, that number has grown every year over the last 5 to 6 years. So it was true many years ago that the hackers and that the scammers targeted corporations more than small business. But every single year since, the percentage of small businesses that experience attacks has risen. So they're definitely turning their attention to small business more. So now we're going to talk about some specific ways that you can protect your business from these kinds of attacks. The first is endpoint security programs. An endpoint is basically every device on your network. So it can be desktop computers, it can be mobile devices, it can be your credit card terminal, it can be your website, it can be an online store that you use for your business. But basically an endpoint is any point of access that a criminal would try to exploit in order to get into your network and obtain data. So a couple of points here over on the right. Number one, more people are working remotely or using personal and mobile devices to access their work functions than ever before. In the old days, there were a lot of things having to do with your work, whether it was accessing your insurance plan or whether it was, logging into your time clock or doing whatever you did at work, your email, that was all strictly from a desktop computer. And of course, these days, that's not true. Many of us are even using our cell phones while we have a desktop computer or a laptop sitting right next to us. And so more than ever, your employees are logging into your network remotely. And so that's something that you have to be able to account for. Particularly with COVID, one of the things that businesses have learned, which I think is a positive, is that we don't all need to be at the office every day. People can work from home than a lot of businesses were able to admit. But as a small business owner, if you do have people working from home, then you do have to figure out how am I protecting my network on a wide variety of devices. On the second point there, endpoint security ensures that every device is compatible with your security measures in place and then protect you against viruses and malware. One of the things about viruses and malware that a lot of people don't realize is that they can sit dormant on your network for a long period of time. Usually the code in the virus and malware is written so that there's specific information they're hoping to get a hold of, and that malware or virus can simply sit on your network for a long period of time waiting for the right opportunity to be able to exploit it. A lot of times the viruses and malware are pretty patient. You'll have no idea that they're sitting on your network until it's too late and that something triggers them to then spring into action. VPN, which is a virtual private network, and virtual LAN, most of these products use that in order to account for unsafe devices and protect your company data. The desktop computers and the laptops and the things that are in the office are usually set up in such a way that they're going to be a little more safe But if someone is logging in from a tablet or from a cell phone, for example, the VPN will essentially divert that traffic onto a more secure network and then back into your network. So there's a variety of ways that you can protect a variety of devices and access points. The last point there, and this is something that a lot of people don't think about, data theft isn't just about finances. It can also be about your company's reputation, and it can destroy your company's reputation. For example, if you have employees using your network in ways that they shouldn't be. And this can be anything and everything. It can be adult sites. It can be even things like shopping for products or visiting social media pages or visiting websites that some of your customers might find objectionable. And if that information were to get out publicly that your company or that your employees were visiting those websites and doing those things, that can damage your reputation. It's not always about protecting yourself just from hackers, just from scammers, just from financial hits. It's also about making sure that your employees are using all of your devices and your network in ways that you approve of and that would be positive for your company's reputation. We hear a lot about cancel culture these days. There are a lot of people out there who are anxious to try and exploit what they learn about a company or what they learn about the company's employees online. So just as there are hackers and scammers who are looking to hurt people financially, there are also people out there, believe it or not, just looking to hurt companies that they may or may not agree with politically for whatever reason. The second thing we're going to talk about is intrusion detection and prevention. And keep in mind, we're kind of staying high level with this stuff. Obviously, there's a lot of detail that we don't have time to get into, but kind of giving you an overview of how these products work. Basically, there's a couple of different ways it works. One is called signature-based, and one is called anomaly-based. What these products are doing is they are constantly monitoring your network traffic for abnormal activity. With signature-based methods, they're basically taking known threats. So if you use a virus protection on your computer at home or at work, for example, you probably notice from time to time that it's giving you an alert that it's found a virus and that it blocked it. The reason it knows that that virus is a virus is because there's a list of all the viruses that are identified by these security companies, and they're constantly updating those. And so basically those are all sort of hard loaded into the protection software. And if it comes across those viruses or those threats, it's able to recognize them, block them, and eliminate them from your network. Anomaly based tracking is a little bit different in that it kind of constantly monitors your network for what's normal. And it says over the normal business day, this is what's happening on your network. And then it's looking for anything outside of that. So basically you're running both signature-based and anomaly-based simultaneously. Anomaly-based can be a little less accurate in the sense that it might think that something that is perfectly fine is bad, and it might actually shut that down temporarily. And then you have to kind of create a new so that it won't do that in the future. But running a combination of the two means that you'll have totality of protection in that way. These sorts of detections and preventions are critical if you have a public website or an online store. The more traffic from the outside that you sort of invite into your network through the public means that you're a little more vulnerable to things happening on your network. So if you operate a website that is publicly accessed, if you operate an online store, then you absolutely have to look into protecting your network more than just what may be included with your basic internet package, which is essentially a firewall. Firewalls are part of all these protection methods, but it's only the starting. This is the one that more and more small businesses are unaware of and that they don't think about when it comes to cybersecurity, and that's mobile device management. They're referred to as MDMs. And so as we talked about, I tell my customers all the time, you shouldn't be afraid of having cell phones in the hands of your employees or tablets. It's actually one of the cheapest employee benefits that you'll ever offer. And that matters in today's work world where you're always trying to attract the best candidates. But when you do have cell phones and tablets out in the field, you do have to be mindful of some additional challenges. And you have to think a little bit in terms of how do I want my employees using those devices. There's essentially two schools of thought. One is this is a work device and you're only going to use it for work. The other is that this is an employee benefit. I'm providing you with a cell phone that's going to make you more productive at work, but I'm also okay with you using it for personal use. And then based on how you view those devices, MDMs give you the ability to basically provision that phone so that you're getting the best out of it, both during the workday and away from work. So we're going to go through some of the things that MDMs do here, starting with that second bullet point. MDMs allow for the provisioning of a device to your company specs prior to giving it to an employee, even if you have a remote employee. So if you operate in multiple states and you're going to ship a cell phone to an employee, by the time that employee actually gets the phone remotely, you've been able to set it up with the apps that it needs. You've been able to set it up with the security programs you have. You've been able to set it up with restrictions potentially on how the device can be used. And that can be anything from data use, setting data limits. Believe it or not, in the years I've been doing this, I've seen some crazy situations where employees get handled a mobile device. They say, okay, great, I got a company device with unlimited data. I'm going to cancel my home internet plan. I'm going to cancel my home cable plan. And basically, I'm going to use my work device for everything at home. And that ends up creating problems for the employer in multiple ways, potentially, depending on what type of content they're using on the phone. But just in terms of data use, in the old days, it used to be overages. Nowadays, it's slowdowns. And having an employee, because of their personal use of the phone, not being able to use their data effectively for work use. So MDMs can help you to set limits. MDMs can actually give you the ability to say, these are the apps you're allowed to access with this phone. These are the apps you're not allowed to access with this phone. These are the types of websites that you can and can't visit. So for example, as a small business owner, you can completely block adult content on a work device so that there's no chance that your employees are exposing your customers or anybody else to the adult content that's on their phone. It also allows for the remote locking and wiping of a lost or stolen device. And this is critical because if those devices are being used at all, as credit card terminals, or if they're being used in any way that they contain sensitive company data. If one of those devices were to be lost or stolen remotely through the use of an MDM, you'd be able to lock it or even erase it so that nobody would have access to that information. The next bullet point there, we kind of talked about a little bit, but it allows for data management, content blocking. So basically, you can even set time limits. So you can say during the workday of 8 to 5, the phone works this way. And then from 5 o'clock on in the evening, the phone works another way. And so you can allow an employee to have a little personal use, but not during the workday. And so think about two things: employee productivity, getting more productivity out of your employees during the workday because they can't be using their phone for personal use while they're at work. But also think about those liability risks again, and what could your employees be doing with a work device that you wouldn't want them to be doing, or that exposes your network to scammers and hackers. One thing that a lot of businesses aren't aware of is that it's actually cheaper in most cases to have your own cell phone plan and to have work devices for your employees than to reimburse them for their own cell phone service. Not only is that cheaper throughout the year because there's economy of scale and the more devices you have on a plan, the cheaper they are versus one employee having one line. So not only is there cost savings throughout the year, But again, we've talked about the fact that if employees are using their personal devices to access your network or to just do any of the other things they do throughout the day, you're putting your company and your network at greater risk if they have a personal phone that you can't trust is secure. And then again, the damages to company reputation that we talked about earlier, that's actually more likely on mobile devices. In my line of work, where I'm working with people with their cell phones, you'd be amazed the number of times, for example, somebody hands me their cell phone to look at something, and whatever they were doing just prior to that is still visible on the screen when they unlock it. It's adult content or it's things of that sort. So imagine that happening out in the field where your employee with a tablet, for example, is about to do a demonstration for one of your potential customers, and there's actually adult content that comes up in the course of opening up or unlocking the tablet. Again, on a personal device, you can have much greater access for a hacker to find out. Maybe he has a disagreement with one of your employees. He hacks into your employee's device. He learns some things about whatever your employee is involved in, and then tries to use that against you, or takes that public and tries to damage your company's reputation. So there's a lot of risks that you're exposed to that are not just financial. The last one we want to talk about here is the easiest to do, but it's the one thing that everybody overlooks. So I do deal with a lot of small businesses that are actually in good shape in terms of their network security, and they're using some of these systems that we've talked about, but their employees have no idea whatsoever about phishing and social engineering. Phishing and social engineering go hand in hand. They are the simplest ways that a criminal can attack your business. They're the easiest to prevent, but they're also oftentimes the most successful. And the reason they're the most successful is because small business owners are not training their employees on what it is and how to recognize it and then what to do about it. Phishing and social engineering go hand in hand. Those first two bullet points kind of explain what they are. The difference is that social engineering is typically over the phone or in person, and phishing is typically digital, where it's using text, email, or instant messaging. But basically what the two of them are is me convincing you that I'm a person of authority and that I need information from you, and it's critical that I get it in order to potentially protect your business, when in reality, I'm going to use that information against you. And it is critical that your employees receive regular training throughout the year about both phishing and social engineering, and that they are constantly reminded of it. I always encourage businesses, even a simple note on all of your computer desktop terminals that just says, when in doubt, don't open an email. When in doubt, come ask me, those kinds of things. There's multiple ways that this can work. I can call your business on the phone and tell you that I am with your phone provider, your internet provider, or even your bank, and I've learned who you bank with by using some other methods. And then I figure out that I convince you basically that I need to get a password from you for your bank account, for example, that someone is attempting to steal money from your bank account. And if you don't provide me this password, then I won't be able to move money from one place to another quickly enough to prevent them from stealing from you. That's one way that it works. Phishing, I would do the same thing, but I would do it in an email. And the email can be very, very convincing. It'll have the logo of your bank. It'll look official, but there's usually clues. These criminals are good at what they do, but they're not always the most intelligent. Sometimes there will be grammatical errors. Sometimes the logo might be the logo from 3 years ago, and it's not the logo your bank is currently using. There are usually clues in these schemes that if you're being attentive, you can figure out that you're being, that there's an attempt of fraud going on. But it's important that your employees know, don't click any links in an email if the email doesn't seem legitimate. Do not ever over the phone offer any business sensitive information, including your network passwords, including your bank account information. It could be anything. When in doubt, don't open texts or emails that don't look right. Sometimes phishing can be as simple as an email where the body is blank, but there's a link, and that's it. And of course, people click on the link, and that basically gives people access to your sensitive info. But it's critical that your employees understand that this is a very real threat, that it happens all the time. A general rule is that no legitimate business that you do business with will ever contact you for that sensitive information. It will always be up to you to contact them, and only then will they ever accept sensitive info from you like passwords. No legitimate business should ever contact you asking for that information. If they do, it's okay to be skeptical. It's okay to go to the web. It's okay to call customer service and say, hey, someone's calling me asking me for this information. 9 times out of 10, that will be fraudulent, and the company will direct you not to give that information out. It's important that your employees know that you would never authorize another person to ask this information on your behalf. That I am the only person as the business owner, or maybe another manager or whoever in your business, we are the only people that would ever ask you for this information. If anybody tells you that I asked them to ask you for this information, call me. Don't talk to them. And then, as I said, always contact a supplier or vendor independently if you're uncertain anything they're asking for is valid. Even if they reach out to you legitimately, there's nothing wrong with telling them that you're going to hang up and you want to call, and you're going to call their customer care directly. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and you should always do that. The one thing that you need to understand about phishing and social engineering that I can't stress highly enough is that the goal is not always to steal from you directly, but it's to steal enough business information that they can then impersonate your business in getting other goods and services. The goal is not necessarily to drain your bank account. The goal is to steal your information and then pretend to be your business with other vendors and with other companies in order to steal goods and services in your name. And even though there's protections for businesses, and it's likely in most cases that you're not going to be on the hook for all of that fraudulent activity, you will be on the hook for a substantial part of it. In this link here that I had prior, if you didn't take a picture of these 2 links, please do. One of them details a small business where even though they identified the fraudulent activity and they were able to prevent some of it, he was still on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars that the banks and other organizations had to spend in order to prevent further fraud and in order to get that money back. And those tens of thousands of dollars to this startup business actually put him out of business. So I can't emphasize enough, it's not always about stealing from you directly. And again, it goes back to company reputation. If you have a criminal out there impersonating your business with other companies in order to steal from them, it will reflect on you negatively in the. So employee training is critical, and this is the one step that even if small businesses think they're doing enough by investing in some of these other security products, this is the part they skip. And no matter how secure your network is from the outside, it's only as secure from the inside as to how your employees react when dealing with the outside world. So it's one thing to lock your house up tight, and it's one thing to have everything secure. But if the crook knows that you have that key under the doormat, then it was all for naught, and they're just going to let themselves in. And it's the same way with your network and your company data. Inside is the easiest way to get to it. Those are the 3 topics. I appreciate your time. And as I mentioned, I'm going to go back to the beginning here. You're welcome to reach out to me offline. My contact info is here. I'm happy to help anyone. The last point that I just wanted to make very briefly is that these cybersecurity products are not as expensive as you think. They're usually based on a subscription model where you pay a certain dollar amount per user per month. For as little as anywhere between $10 and $20 a month per user, you can have a pretty substantial security package for both your desktop and your mobile devices that will protect your business pretty thoroughly. So if you're a business with, say, 10 users, couple $100 a month is a very small price to pay for what could be devastating in terms of bankrupting your business. Again, thanks for your time. Do we have any questions on that last topic? Any questions anybody wants to verbalize rather than put in the chat? All right. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you all, and we're glad to have you